optimism. It was a city the city was based on egalitarian relations between Jews and Arabs. The medieval laws of Islam dealing with the non-Muslims were totally irrelevant on everyday life. Totally irrelevant. So the relations in the street, in schools, and in the neighborhoods were very, very good between Jews and Arabs. There were no exclusive neighborhoods, exclusive religious neighborhoods in Jerusalem. So the concept that we have in mind that there is a Jewish quarter, which is exclusive Jewish, or Muslim quarter, which is exclusive Muslim, or Christian, which is exclusive Christian, and Armenian, of course, is wrong. Since the 1870s, Jerusalem enjoyed demographic Jewish majority. There was, since the 1870s, Jewish majority in Jerusalem, and Jews lived in big numbers in the Muslim quarter, in the Armenian quarter, and few even in the Christian quarter. Muslims lived in the Jewish quarter. They sit in coffee shops of each other and so on. So life was mixed heavily. And for instance, I would like to share with you a few sentences from memoirs that I use in my book. Many memoirs, mostly of those memoirs, are published by Jews. So here goes a short description on Shabbat, Saturday life in a joint neighborhood. It was published by a person, Yaakov Elazar. Elazar is a very famous Jewish family name from the Balkans, ex-Yugoslavia, not far down from Vienna. They came to Palestine, I think, during the Ottoman period, early. And he writes as following: Muslim women respected Jewish religious customs. Their Jewish neighbors would ask them not to draw water from the communal well in the courtyard on the Shabbat, so as not to dirty the yard that the Jewish women had worked so hard to clean the day before. The Muslim women acceded to the request of their Jewish neighborhood and drew the water they needed for their household before Shabbat began. And this was we should keep in mind that Muslim women were not religiously obligated to observe the Jewish Shabbat. But they wanted to show that they appreciate the work that the Jewish women had done and their desire to observe the Shabbat in the spotless surroundings, that they respect the other. And here the respect of the other was there very much so in many spheres of life. For instance, there are other quotations that I use that Muslims enter to a religious Jewish home, and the Jew brought to his guest water and a piece of cake. So the Muslim bless the Jewish blessing, the bracha, on the water and the cake. And it was common. They saw it as a nice behavior and respect of his host. There were no big religious walls and animosity between them. In other cases, Muslim boys went to a Jewish school and learned Talmud, the Talmud. And the father insisted, the father, Uthman al-Khalidi, insisted that his two boys will learn Talmud as any other Jew student. Because the school principal wanted to say, okay, you are not a Jew, why you don't have to study this stuff. No, he insisted that he will study it. But unfortunately, all this had gone after 48. The national struggle divided Jews from Arabs gradually, but the big event was the 48 war. And the 48 war, and I cannot go into details how it cut off Jews from Arabs in a certain neighborhood. At southwest Jerusalem, 22,000 Palestinians lived in southwest Jerusalem, outside the walls, in what is today Jewish Jerusalem or West Jerusalem, and all of them became war refugees. In these neighborhoods, only 500 Jews lived among the 22,000 Palestinians. And the war that was actually a civil war over their heads, in their backyards, in their homes, between two fighting militias, brought each of the two communities to say, we cannot stay here. The war is over our heads. We must leave. And then the Israeli militia, the Jewish, it was not the state of Israel, April 48, before the state was declared, the Jewish militia took over this part of the city, which is now West Jerusalem. The Palestinians left their homes, and I would like to share with you a few sentences from memoirs of a Jewish woman from Jerusalem, Ora Achimeir, and she describes the following, that her father got an offer to get, they were war refugees. Achimeir, she is now called Achimeir, I don't remember her father and mother name. But her parents and she herself were war refugees from another part of Jerusalem. They are Jews. And war refugees, they left their homes, they were forced to leave their homes because of the war in North Jerusalem. And then the father got a proposal to take over a house that a Palestinian left behind in southwest Jerusalem. The mother, I have to add, the mother, it was for Ora's mother, it was her second marriage, because her first husband was killed shortly after marriage by Arabs in her town in the Galilee, in Sfat, in the 1929 riots. So I quote, "Mother thought about historical justice, retribution for acts and murder and theft by Arabs that she had endured in Sfat and which would have occurred in Jerusalem had we not won the war." Very normal. Father was unsure, but saw in his mind, so he said, "The owners of the home and their children and grandchildren returning to the home and demanding their property." And he knew that each day he lived in such a house, their accusing eyes would pursue him. And even an enemy is a human being, he said. The argument between mother and father was conducted, as always, in hushed voices and in Yiddish, but was piercing nonetheless. It was very tough and very typical dilemma. Father, I jump through a few sentences. Father put an end to the debate by rejecting the offer and leasing an apartment for key money on Ben Yehuda Street in center Jerusalem. Better to live in poverty than to live well on the ruins of the other. That was his attitude. But the struggle is very typical, because in other cases there was no struggle. But also the struggle and the high moral decision was taken by Israeli Jews. After 1967, things changed dramatically. The expansion after 1967 war is based on nationalism. It's a very nationalistic expansion. It's confrontational. It's done in order to well base the Israeli annexation of the former Jordanian territory, because Israel annexed East Jerusalem unilaterally, because it is not accepted, it's unaccepted according to the international law, but Israel wants, through facts on the ground and building settlements in East Jerusalem, to state and to legitimize its expansion. So it's very nationalistic, it's very confrontational, and very hegemonic. In all these three characteristics, it is very different from the late 19th century expansion. But after 1967, Israel is a regional superpower. And Israel can make it and can create facts on the ground. And the Palestinians are the weak side. And actually, much of the tension in Jerusalem is based on this conflict. Just remember, and you will see a few photos there, just remember last summer, what we call the Jerusalem Intifada, following the war in Gaza, when the Palestinians from Jerusalem, young generation, frustrated and eager on the killing or the murder of a young Palestinian boy by Jewish terrorists, I must say, and murderers, and they burned a 16-year-old boy in Jerusalem. So the Palestinians went out for a few weeks, and there were riots along the tram track, and you will see a few photos. It was an expression of the conflict over Jerusalem between the two national movements. But the conflict that we see today, either in the North Jerusalem, in Shoafat, or Bet Hanina area, or in Silwan, or sometimes you read about Palestinian car crashing into Jewish people, bypassers that wait for the tram. And terrorist attacks, mainly by Palestinians, but also sometimes by Israeli Jews. This kind of a civil war of conflict zone, very typical to these days of Jerusalem, but it was not there at the first 20 years of the Israeli rule over Arab Jerusalem. It was not there. The first 20 years between 67 and 87 were, compared to today, very peaceful. So we're not very peaceful, but compared to what we have today in Jerusalem, they were very peaceful, and the city was managed then by Teddy Kollek, raised up in Vienna, bringing some of the, let's say, Viennese or the Austro-Hungarian culture or multicultural attitude, trying to root it in the hot atmosphere of Jerusalem. But this has gone. I would like to use the memoirs of his main assistant, or Teddy Kollek's main assistant, Meron Benvenisti, who was actually in charge of East Jerusalem. Teddy Kollek put him in charge of East Jerusalem, and he sums up his life experience as following. We thought that people like us, people with good hearts and aesthetic tastes who believe in coexistence, could create an apparatus with which they could manage the city and its surroundings. What happened? They, he relates to Jews with a great appetite for land and power, they grabbed it all away. It breaks my heart to see what romantic idiots I